One of the things that people have asked me about birth certificates, and I can't tell you how important it is, the work of senators and House of Representative members to help people get birth certificates in Pennsylvania if they don't happen to have their paper copy. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to my state rep and said, gee, I really need a birth certificate for my youngest son because he's going to college and I can't find his birth certificate. So my state rep was extremely helpful in that. Okay.
Yes, and I'm sorry if you said this earlier when I wasn't here, but I'm just trying to understand if there are 760,000 people that you identified initially and there are 167,000 that are inactive. Are you now saying that it's about 500 and some thousand that
we will
do not
know
have?
If these people are truly inactive because we sent them a letter.
When do you get that back?
We're getting calls and responses right now.
So what's your best estimate right now, today, of how many people?
I'm back to the original numbers. The census, the United States Census, says that we have the number of citizens over 18 is 9.6 million. The PennDOT database says the number of people over 18 in Pennsylvania is 9.5 million. That's 99%. So we're on the hunt for the people who are left.
100,000.
Roughly.
Yeah.
That goes back to if you divide 9.5 by 9.6, you get 99%. So roughly between 80 and 100,000. Yes, sir.
Yes, to backtrack a bit, you'd kind of cited that county DAs don't really prosecute voter fraud cases because rapes and murders are more important. You're basically saying it's not a priority. However, under President George W. Bush and Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, they made it a very high priority for U.S. attorneys to find and prosecute voter fraud cases to the point where they fired 9 of them for not doing it, for not finding any cases. So how do you jive those two facts?
My experience is at the county level, and I worked with 2 district attorneys when I was a county commissioner, and they really are stretched for resources to cover the cases that they have. And I would, if I were a district attorney and I had to use my resources wisely, I would do it for the cases that were most critical. And oftentimes, particularly with voter issues, there really is, it's hard. When you go, one of the, in Chester County we had an issue where a voter came in, and I think it was probably an attempt at voter impersonation, and it just so happened that whoever was in, that one of the election workers knew the person and knew who the person, that this voter was not the person he said he was. You know, it's one of those weird things that happens. And so he challenged, he challenged and said, you're not Megan Sweeney, and turned around and ran out the door. So there's no record of that. And if I were someone who was on the edge of being identified as someone committing voter fraud, I'd be out the door too.
Okay, but what you're testifying to or saying now, it shows that the system works. So there's, why do we need this extra law when the existing system works? Every county right now issues a voter registration card to every registered voter after verifying their identity. So why do we need this extra law?
To make sure that the person who presents himself as the voter is the person who is the person who is on the voting list. I'll tell you, I was at Johnstown and I asked all the kids, all right, kids, what do you think about voter ID? And there were 2 young women, and it was a whole audience full of kids. There were 2 young women, and I said, so what do you think about this? And it was an African-American girl and her friend, who, they were obviously good friends, a white young woman sitting next to her, and the African-American girl kind of pokes her and says, well, because I don't want Melissa to go in and say she is Tanya. And then everybody laughed, all the kids laughed. But the idea is to make sure that if you go in and you say that you're Carol Aichele, that I'm in fact who I say I am, because I could be Megan Sweeney, and I could sign Megan Sweeney's name as well as Megan Sweeney could sign it, and no one would know the difference. I've talked publicly about the issues with dead people receiving ballots in New Hampshire. I'm sure you've all seen that YouTube thing. And then there
But that was disproved, that this last primary, that there were no cases in New Hampshire, actually.
You look at the YouTube thing.
Is there anyone who hasn't asked a question yet who would like to immediately?
It's what we call firsties and seconds.
Well, Secretary has another point to make very quickly. So we have
Everyone is. I'm fine with it.
And we have a gap of 9% of about 700,000 voters. I don't understand what the has to do with that.
Well, think about it. If you can't get a Pennsylvania ID unless you're a resident. So so if we have 9.6 million people who are 18 years of age or older, citizens, they are the only people who are eligible to vote in a Pennsylvania election. And PennDOT has already in their database 9.5 of them, then we should have most of the 8.2 because that's a much smaller number. And it's the same Venn diagram.
When you compare PennDOT and voter list, you came up with a gap of 729,000 voters, some of which you think are people who are inactive on the job station.
Right.
But as I understand it, among that group, that 91%, there were several hundred thousand people whose names were on the PennDOT rolls that didn't have licenses that expired years and years ago, or just had one.
No. These were current. These were current.
We're still, when we talk about election years, we're still right now at 751,000, and the result of
Minus 167,000, minus however many are non-matches, minus however many are in care facilities, minus however many have student IDs with expiration dates, minus however many have municipal IDs, minus whoever have passports, military IDs, or any other form of acceptable ID. I don't think I've answered any questions from you yet, have I? Okay, it's your turn. I'm hoping that it increases voter turnout. In Georgia, when they instituted their photo ID law, actually, election returns, the numbers went up. All right, you're kind of a tag team here, right?
Yeah. Even with the announcement of the new state ID announced last week with the less restrictive requirements, there still are many stories popping up of people who are having difficulties and continue having difficulties and may not get those resolved in time for the November vote, in time for the November election. Does that give you any pause as to whether this law can be appropriately implemented so that every voter has a chance to vote now in the November election? Is there any pause that maybe this is being rushed in, being done a little too fast?
We are going to make every effort to make sure that all 8.2 million people know the message, know how to get photo ID, and you can help us make sure that we know about the people who are having trouble getting photo ID. We have a toll-free number. It's 1-877-VOTES-PA. We are getting calls. We will help address whatever issues. Actually, the calls that came in helped us look at ways to make photo ID more widely available to people who didn't have it. I learned about the issues in Puerto Rico through that process, and I also learned that PennDOT keeps the old database. So if you were a driver in 1990 and you gave up your license, they didn't give up their information, so they still have the information on you. I don't know if we feel good or bad about that, but Whatever information you give to PennDOT, it never goes away.
One more question, then we're going to wrap up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sorry to go back to the original point of all this, that you were talking about voter fraud as one of the original reasons for this law. If you could only bring up anecdotal evidence that it's happened, no concrete proof that it was an actual factor. So what's the ultimate point of this law?
I think a photo ID has become so much a part of life in the 21st century. You have to show photo ID for everything, to mail packages at UPS, to register at a hotel, to ride on Amtrak, to fly on an airplane. It's a part of our life. If you had asked me this in 2000, when I really wanted to address the issue of fair and honest elections, the 2000 election, I say other people were bothered by it. I clearly was bothered by the 2000 election. And I want to make sure that I do everything I can to make sure that elections here in Pennsylvania are fair and honest, and every eligible voter has photo ID and votes in this election. So the process that was selected as photo ID. There will be times going forward when we can look at other ways to make sure that elections are fair and honest, but that's the basis of this whole process. I was talking at a show earlier today, and you know, photo ID, the presidential election, there's so many people who come. It's the biggest election turnout in Pennsylvania, and it's not going to, I'm just guessing here, but it's not going to, the election won't turn on one vote statewide. But there are a lot of local elections that come down to 1 or 2 votes. We had an election in Lancaster County where they decided the election by the flip of a coin. If someone was in that count of votes that was not a valid, eligible voter, then the election wasn't fair. So think about it not only in the context of national elections where there are so many voters, but think how it affects the local level. And if we went through the database upstairs, we could tell you lots of elections that were decided by 1 or 2 votes. So it's not only a voter ID law for the presidential election, it's a voter ID law for your school board race and your township supervisor race, and oftentimes those are close races. So
Thanks.
For the members of the press,